The old farmhouse still smelled of rain-soaked wood and moth dust. A thin film of silence lay over the rooms, as if sound itself had long since drowned in the damp air. The wallpaper, once ivory, had turned the color of old bones, peeling in long, curling strips that whispered when the wind breathed through broken glass. A single bulb swung from the ceiling, its weak light painting the floor in uneven ellipses like slow, dying heartbeats. Detective Elias Monroe stood in the doorway, motionless, his breath fogging in the cold. He had been here before, not this house, not exactly, but this feeling. The kind that seeped through the walls, clung to the skin, and whispered the truth he'd tried for years to unhear. The truth that every case, every corpse was a mirror. The wooden floor moaned beneath his boots, each creak a reluctant confession. Dust motes drifted through the air, golden when caught in the light, but when they fell they turned gray like ashes. A moth fluttered against the glass, frantic in its search for freedom, until its wings stilled against the pain. He imagined her here, a girl he did not yet remember but somehow already knew. She had lived in this silence once, her laughter echoing down the hallways, her voice carried out across the Kentucky fields. But now the house only remembered her absence. The echo of what she'd left behind hummed through the floorboards, a low, patient hum, like the sound of guilt waiting for recognition. Elias touched the wall, and for a second the chill bit through the glove as though the house were alive and remembering. He should have turned back, closed the file again, sealed it back into the vault of the forgotten. But the silence here had weight, and weight was truth. Outside, the sky bruised with the last light of dusk. Crows perched on the telephone wires, still as prayer, watching him. The fields around the house were frozen with memory, brittle grass crackling under frost. Somewhere in that stillness, the past stirred. 2. Old disappearance resurfaces after discovery of symbolic object. The sheriff's deputy had called it a coincidence. A child digging in the field behind the old farmhouse, finding what looked like a charm bracelet tangled in roots. But when Elias saw the initials, LM, engraved on the silver heart, the air inside him turned heavy, metallic. Lillian Moore, age 17, missing since September 1998. He remembered the headline like a scar. Kentucky teen vanishes without a trace, foul play suspected. Her photograph, a shy smile, one eye squinting against the sun, the wind tangling her hair, had haunted bulletin boards, diner walls, and the undersides of his eyelids for months. Until the case went cold, swallowed by newer tragedies, more solvable sins. Now holding the bracelet beneath the gray sky, Elias felt the years between collapse. The metal was tarnished, but the etching was clear, sharp as regret. He could almost smell her perfume again, faint and floral, clinging to the corners of memory. Inside the evidence bag, the charm seemed to pulse faintly as though alive. Objects had memory, he'd learned that. They held emotion the way trees held rings. This bracelet had waited 27 years to be found, to speak again. The deputy spoke softly behind him. "Think it's hers." Elias didn't answer. His jaw tensed. He wanted to say no, wanted to believe in coincidence, in randomness. But coincidences were for the innocent. He pocketed the photograph, turned toward the house. Have the field sealed. Nobody touches it until morning. "Sir." But Elias was already walking, boots sinking into the earth like anchors. He felt the old hunger rising again, that reckless, devouring need to know. Inside, the rooms were colder now, the air tighter. He stood at the base of the stairs, the charm bracelet still in his hand, and whispered her name under his breath. "Lillian." The word drifted up the staircase and disappeared into the dark. Somewhere above, the ceiling cracked softly like an answer. 3. Investigator shows personal involvement, mixing duty with obsession. He had known her. Not officially, not in any way that would have been written down, but enough. She had been the daughter of his high school teacher, the girl who used to wait by the front steps after class, drawing in her notebook, tracing shapes of things she would never see again. He remembered her voice when she spoke his name once, barely audible, as if she feared even the sound of it might vanish. Elias had been 22 then, a rookie with a badge too new to tarnish. He'd helped with the first search. He stood by the riverbank as divers pulled nothing from the water, his reflection shivering on the surface beside her missing shadow. He promised himself, and maybe her ghost, that he'd find the truth. But promises, like small towns, decayed quietly. Now, 27 years later, he was back where it had all begun. Older, lonelier, and far less certain which of them had truly disappeared. He set the bracelet on the table, its surface catching the light like a single tear that refused to fall. The case file lay open beside it, pages yellowed, photos blurred by time. In one of them she stood beneath a Ferris wheel, holding cotton candy, her smile both bright and uncertain. He touched the corner of the photo, tracing her outline. "Why now?" he murmured. The room didn't answer, but the silence thickened, congealing around him. His phone buzzed, the lab results from the bracelet's soil trace. "Organic residue," the message read, "consistent with human decomposition." Elias felt the ground shift inside him. He closed his eyes and saw her face, not the photograph, but something deeper, something remembered from dreams. She had once said, or maybe he had imagined it, "You can't find what doesn't want to be found." Now the echo of that voice followed him everywhere. In the creak of the stairs, the hum of the refrigerator, the hollow between each heartbeat. He was supposed to solve this, but the truth, he realized, wasn't out there in the soil or the evidence. It was festering in him, in the part that had never stopped looking. And as the night pressed closer, he understood that this case wasn't reopening. It had never closed. They arrived as if summoned by the bracelet's dull glint, people whose lives had once orbited Lillian Moore and then, after the night she vanished, fell out of gravity. They entered the farmhouse like careful trespassers, unsure whether they were visiting a shrine or a crime scene. Each face carried its own weather, the accumulated storms of years spent rehearsing what-ifs in the privacy of kitchens and sleepless beds. Her mother, Ruth, came first. Grief had sedimented into her posture, an invisible yoke that drew the shoulders in. She ran her fingers across the table where the bracelet lay and did not cry. Perhaps there were no tears left, only the ache that forms when the body learns to hold absence like a habit. Her voice was a thin filament. She hated bracelets, said they made a sound she couldn't stand. A small smile, a wound reopening. But her father bought it in Louisville the summer before. She wore it anyway. Her father never came. He had gone soft in the face and hard in the eyes, the kind of hardness that drinks or drives away. Rumors said he left the county years ago with a woman who didn't know Lillian's name. Rumors said other things too. The file remembered them. Elias pretended he did not. Eleni, Lillian's closest friend, still wore her hair in a braid that draped across her shoulder like a river. She stood near the window, half in shadow, and spoke without looking at Elias. "We were going to leave after graduation, save tips from the diner, bus tickets just to start." Her breath fogged the pain. She said this town knew too much about us, or not enough. A pause, then a confession she tried to keep light. "I was jealous of how the wind liked her better." The old teacher came, the one who'd stayed after class, grading in a room rinsed with chalk dust while a shy daughter waited on the steps outside. He was paler than memory, his voice a paper cut. "Lillian wrote about light," he told Elias. "Not sunshine. Light like the way it slants through barns, the way it slides off a knife. She turned everything into weather." He lifted the photograph from the file with reverent fingertips. "You turned it into evidence." The boy who wasn't quite a boyfriend arrived last. A mechanic now with grease beneath his nails, he wore his guilt like a locket. He had been the last to see her, he said, though he'd said it many times before. That night in 1998 he'd dropped her near the county fair where the Ferris wheel blinked like a wavering pulse. "She told me not to wait. I didn't." He swallowed, throat hitching. "She liked to walk alone, said it helped her think, like the road could borrow her thoughts and bring them back cleaner." They all spoke, but the speech landed in fragments, as if the truth were a vase smashed long ago and every shard reflected a different face. Their words filled the rooms with a soft clutter, the kind that gathers in corners and refuses to sweep out. Elias listened as if the house were taking dictation. The people who loved Lillian kept returning to one detail, always the same: her quiet. The way she held silence inside her like a second heart. It made Elias think of the bracelet again. The small sound it would have made, the private music of a life interrupted. Between these faces, Elias stood like a broken hinge between past and present. He had a role, officer, listener man with a badge to pin facts into place, but his pulse betrayed him, knocking at memories he had promised to seal. The mother's nod, the friend's braid, the teacher's thin hands. Each was a weight placed on the scale where duty struggled against something more dangerous. The air became heavy with a shared superstition. If they all remembered hard enough, if they braided their recollections into a rope, perhaps they could pull her back across the years. Evening sagged into the farmhouse. The crows left the wires. Eleni's voice barely above a whisper. "Do you think she wanted to go?" A question with teeth chewing through time. Ruth flinched, the mechanic's gaze fell, the teacher exhaled a dry leaf of regret. Elias heard himself answer, soft as dust. "Wanting is a kind of leaving." In the silence that followed, he felt the case burrow a little deeper beneath his ribs. He escorted them out one by one. The threshold kept the last light, a pale band against the dark. Each goodbye sounded provisional, a loan against a future that never paid out. When the door latched, the house exhaled. Elias stood alone with the bracelet and the hush that had survived them all. People are evidence too, he thought, the kind that bleeds through the paper. But unlike objects, they never agree on their shape. He ran his thumb over the silver heart and felt, absurdly, as if it might be warm. 5. Symbolic clues, photos, diary, patterns build intellectual intrigue. He did not sleep. Instead, he let the house narrate itself in the hush between floorboard murmurs, in the fatigue-heavy hum of the refrigerator that no longer worked but still pretended. He arranged the artifacts along the table like constellations and waited for a pattern to burn through. The photographs first. A strip of booth pictures from the fair found in the back of the original evidence envelope and misfiled under MISC. Lillian in 4 frames. Laughter flared, eyes half closed, a mock scowl, a mouth caught mid-word. Then the last frame, her gaze off camera, distracted by something outside the booth, expression smoothing into attention. Elias magnified the corner until the grain rasped beneath his light. The faint ghost of a reflection on the metal edge, shoulder, perhaps. A blur that could be anyone, or no one. The Ferris wheel loomed behind the booth window like an eclipse caught in serial motion. Next, the diary, or what passed for one. It was not a book, but a scatter of index cards bound with twine, each card dated in pencil, thoughts like spare ribs. On the card for August 10, 1998, small sounds are truer than loud ones. On September 2, if I leave, I want to leave clean. Not as a stain, as an outline. On the last card, the day of her disappearance, I think there are 2 of me and only one of them can survive this town. The handwriting tilted fiercely right, urgent, like the words wanted to step off the card and keep going. Pinned beside the cards, a page from a church bulletin with a pressed clover taped to it. Not 4 leaves 3, but 1 leaf split. A false luck. The corner of the page carried a thumbprint, faint and smudged. The lab had called it non-probative back then. Elias traced it anyway, as if the smudge might confess after so many years of silence. He mapped her movements that last week in September. Diner shift patterns, sightings at the library, the late call from a payphone near Route 17 that never completed. The map on the wall took on the aspect of a body, roads as veins, the river a dark artery, the fairgrounds a jittering heart. The routes favored repetition, the comfort of known circuits. Yet there were deviations. A path behind the farmhouse toward the old orchard, 2 evenings in a row stopping at the school after hours, a third night when she did not go home at all. Patterns point both ways, he told himself. They reveal and they lure. He felt the tug. One more artifact, the bracelet itself. Under the lab lamp, the charms showed faint scratches, random at first glance. But when Elias turned the silver heart, he saw a rhythm, a series of short, shallow lines along the top edge as if scraped against something at an angle and in sequence. Not struggle, not accident, intent. He held the heart close and tried to imagine Lillian making those marks with the patience of a girl who understood that sometimes the smallest signs are the most durable. Morse. No. A code of her own, private language carved into a public trinket. He set the scratches against the index cards, gritting the marks to the cadence of her phrases. The first card's line breaks matched the deeper nicks. The final card's tilt aligned with a diagonal scrape on the charm back. It wasn't language, it was rhythm, a metronome of intent. She was leaving a beat to follow in case words failed. Elias felt the quickening inside him, not triumph exactly, more like dread arriving on schedule. Then a noise, not a noise, the breath of the stairwell. He went to the bottom step and leaned into the darkness. The paint was bubbled, the wood old and soft. On the third riser he found flecks of cheap glitter, fairground shrapnel, lodged where the toe of a shoe had scuffed hard. He pictured her running up or down, the night air in her chest, the smell of hay and fried sugar clinging to her hair. He pressed his fingers there and felt nothing but the grain of wood and the gravity of time. He spoke into the stairwell, barely moving his lips. "I'm listening." Somewhere above, a door settled into its frame. Somewhere far away, a freight train coughed. The house resumed its watch. Elias returned to the table and arranged the cards into a new order, not chronological but tonal, stitching the quiet thoughts to the louder fears. He realized he was not only building a sequence, he was assembling the silhouette of a mind under pressure, a girl crowding herself toward a decision. The pattern that emerged was not about who had taken Lillian. It was about who Lillian refused to be. That knowledge narrowed the field and widened the abyss. He felt the case hook in the soft tissue behind his heart, tugging him toward an answer that wouldn't look like justice when he arrived, only like a mirror angled to a less flattering light. 6. Twist questions investigators' perception, blurring truth and delusion. It happened near dawn, the hour when objects forget their edges and the mind, tired of guarding itself, leaves the door ajar. The farmhouse windows wore a thin gray with the tentative promise of morning. Elias sat in the chair where he had fallen, palm cupped around the bracelet, eyes open but unmoored. Somewhere in the edgeless space between wake and dream, Lillian entered the room. Or the memory of her did. Or the memory of his memory. She did not speak. He didn't either. They shared the quiet with the solemnity of two people exchanging a secret they both already knew. She crossed to the table and touched the index cards. Her hand passed through the paper the way light passes through dust and makes it briefly visible. She looked at the map, the pinned routes he'd drawn like stitches across the county's pale skin. Then her gaze moved to him, steady, unafraid. He felt the skin on his arms rise, not from fear but from recognition, as if he were the one who had finally been found. The phone on the floor buzzed, yanking sound into the fragile scene. Lab again, Partial DNA from the clover tape matched Ruth, the mother, transfer, nothing more. More definitive. Soil on the bracelet consistent not only with the field but with riverbank loam. Another call chimed in. Deputies had something near the old orchard. A shallow depression, bone fragments that might be animal, might not. The news should have snapped him back into procedural shape. Instead, the room seemed to tilt. Lillian, no, the thought of her, moved through the tilt without losing balance. Elias stood too fast. The room pixelated, memory and present co-signed the same breath. He heard the teacher's voice from yesterday. You turned her into evidence. He heard Eleni. Do you think she wanted to go? He heard his own answer, wanting as a kind of leaving, and realized he had been describing himself. 27 years of proximity to loss had thinned him, made him porous, susceptible to being filled with other people's ghosts. He wasn't sure where Lillian ended anymore, and where his remorse began. He stepped to the mirror nailed behind the kitchen door, a cheap rectangle warped at the edges. In it he saw a man who looked like himself and also like the teacher in 40 years, like the mechanic in 10, like the father who had driven away and kept driving. For an instant, Lillian's face slid over his like a transparency, aligning at the eyes. The effect shivered through him, not possession, permission. The permission to see what she had chosen. On the map his finger traced from the fair to the school to the orchard to the river, then stopped. Not at a point he'd circled, but at the blank space between two pins. A route unmarked because it wasn't a place. It was a decision. The scratches on the heart charm, the cadence, the index card's tilt, none of it spelled a plea to be rescued. It was choreography, a dance meant to carry her past the hands that would help, past the town that turned her into rumor, past even the version of herself that had learned to speak softly, so others would not startle. What he saw then did not change the facts of bone and soil. It changed their meaning. Lillian had curated her disappearance. Not clean, no leaving ever is, but deliberate. She had approached the river not as a victim drawn, but as a girl stepping into the only silence big enough to hold her. Or perhaps she staged the suggestion of that ending and slipped along the river's bend to a road that led out of the state. Two truths threaded. Both were versions of leaving. He could not decide which to believe without using himself as the measure, and that meant the answer would always be crooked. He returned to the table and laid the bracelet down gently as though it might bruise. He thought of the scratches again, rhythm over language. He tapped the pattern with 2 fingers on the wood, a slow pulse, then faster. In the second tempo, he recognized his own heartbeat the night he first searched those banks in 1998, a rookie drowning in the idea of rescue. The twist wasn't a revelation about a suspect. It was a recalibration of sight. He had been looking for someone to blame because blame is louder than sorrow. He had been mistaking the volume of evidence for its truth. Outside, the day finally arrived, thin and reluctant. Elias washed his face in the tin sink. The water came rusty and cold. In the ripple of the metal basin, his reflection broke and reformed, a face learning to carry 2 possibilities at once. He understood that solving the case would require him to leave one of those possibilities unburied, where it could wander the banks of his mind indefinitely. Justice would have a body. Mercy would remain a rumor. He dried his hands and listened for Lillian. Of course, she had already left. 7. Ending feels haunting and unresolved. Truth brings no peace. They found what the deputies would later call sufficient remains near the orchard's edge, tangled in roots that had grown around bone the way a hand closes in prayer. The lab would confirm identity. The bracelet's soil told the rest. The official narrative tightened like a knot. The girl from 1998, the river, the orchard, the long sleep in centuries-old dirt. The arrest, long delayed, briefly dramatic, would belong to the boyfriend who wasn't, for obstruction then and a panicked lie about seeing her after the fair. The community, starved for closure, would swallow the headline whole and feel, for a week full. Elias stood apart from the hazard tape, the sirens, the clipped voices speaking in evidence numbers. He watched the wind move through the orchard like a rumor deciding which tree to tell the truth to. In his pocket the index cards rustled, his private liturgy. He did not argue with the paperwork. He did not shout that the river could carry two stories at once. He did not tell Ruth what Lillian had taught him about silence. He merely nodded when the sheriff clapped his shoulder and said, "We got there." As if there were ever a there to arrive at. He returned to the farmhouse at dusk and sat in the chair where night remembered him. He placed the bracelet at the center of the table and turned off the lamp. The dark thickened into the old intimacy. He thought of the scratches, rhythm, not code, and tapped them again, this time softer, the sound more prayer than proof. It felt like knocking on a door nobody would open. It felt like Lillian answering anyway, but only with weather. A draft along the baseboards, a moth's blind thud against the window, the faintest vibration in the nails holding the house together. Eleni came by once more. She stood in the doorway as if stepping into a dream she didn't fully trust. "They'll say it's simple now," she murmured. He nodded. She moved her gaze to the bracelet. She hated bracelets, she said again, as if repeating it could summon a different past. Then with a breath you could mistake for wind, "Thank you." She didn't stay. The past is heavier at night. Carrying it together would only bruise them both. Ruth did not return. Later, a letter, lined paper, neat script. "I wish there were a word for a mother who no longer has a daughter. Widow is for wives. Orphan is for children. I keep arranging the furniture so the house stops expecting her. It doesn't help." He folded the page and placed it with the index cards. Their edges made a small chorus, paper cuts of remembrance. The arrest made the news crawl. The town quieted into the performance of relief. The fairgrounds opened the next summer because everything eventually opens again. The Ferris wheel blinked against new evenings. On one of those nights, Elias parked by the field and watched the cycle rise and sink, a mechanical tide. Teens took pictures in the booth, 4 frames just like before. Their laughter blew across to him and lost its vowels in the wind. He went back to the river in the hour that forgets edges. He walked the bank until the grass soaked his cuffs and the cold said enough. Standing where the water narrowed into a throat of current, he spoke, not to the river, not to the case, but to the space in him she had excavated. "I can't tell if I found you," he said, "or if you let me think I did." The river replied in its one voice, which is 1,000 voices pretending to agree. "The file will close. The body will be named. The boyfriend's mugshot will shrink in the archive until it is only a pixel of blame in a sea of other pixels. Elias will turn in his report with sentences built to withstand scrutiny. Precise, bloodless, hard like pebbles polished smooth by bureaucratic water. He will also carry in a pocket nobody can search, a private version. The cadence on the bracelet, the tilt of the handwriting, the feeling of being granted sight for a moment and then politely asked to look away. He sits now in the farmhouse one last time. The crows have abandoned the wires hold their shape anyway. The wallpaper breathes out its tired bone color. He leaves the bracelet where the sun will find it in the morning and turn it briefly gold. On the way out, he pauses on the 3rd step and touches the glitter, all but invisible until the light slips just right. In the hush, he hears what might be Lillian's final instruction. A rustle, a nearly word, a permissive absence. Listen to what does arrive. He closes the door. The latch clicks with the authority of closure and the duplicity of it. Outside, the fields accept night in one steady swallow. Somewhere, a mother tries a new configuration of furniture. Somewhere, a friend walks home with her braid chopped short, as if weight were the problem. Somewhere, a teacher writes a name on the board and erases it immediately, chalk dust hovering like an undecided weather. And somewhere a detective, no longer young, not yet done, drives into the kind of darkness that feels like company. The case is solved, the public says, the papers agree. In the quiet he has earned and cannot refuse, Elias hears another verdict, quieter, unprintable. He drives with the window down, letting the cold undress his thoughts of their uniforms. No triumph, not grief either. Something in between that doesn't leak or seal. He names it by not nomming it and invites it to sit beside him. It does. The road unspools. The night listens. And the silence, old, patient, exacting, holds the weight of a truth that will never consent to be only one thing.